one of the things that I was struck about with chapter 2 is how law enforcement has been shaped around taking money from everybody, and how this has become one of the main sources for local police departments to get money. That, well, even if they don't find that person guilty who they've arrested, they will still take all their property and they'll still take all of their money. And it seems like there was some situations where the police seized property knowing that the person would not be guilty of a crime. They just wanted the property. And when they were taken to court, the courts upheld this system that you can actually find property guilty of a crime, not that it has to be attached to any person. The property itself is guilty of a crime, and as such can be taken by the government, even if the person they arrest is not guilty. And that just struck me as something I had never heard prior to this. I mean, I know that if you are guilty and there's money involved, the police department or that local government will take that money. But I didn't know it was so sort of formulated around the um, the seizure of property. And I don't know if that struck anybody else, or had a different different take on that whole theme.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh sorry, there's
I
a podcast called Undisclosed, and they actually discussed where somewhere around the Mason-Dixon line, wherever South Carolina going north and south versus South Carolina, I think going north and west. I mean, not sorry, west and east. There is a town that is like the amount of money they collect is ridiculous because they're worried about the drug trade, and so they know that around that area of the highway, people are usually making their connections in that way. Some lady lost the money to her house that she was going to pay cash for because of those police officers. The sheriff in that area was getting inmates in the area to build him a boathouse. And I think the boathouse was called, I forget what it was called, but anyway, it actually says on the side of the boat, paid by, you know, drug money, or money implying that it's drug money, or that it's what do you call it? It's money that's been confiscated, the
Hmm.
correct way. And
Yeah.
so it's a big, huge scandal. But yeah, it's bad. The lady is still fighting to this day for that money.
Mm.
It's crazy.
The other one was the property for the drugs. If my husband had the drugs on him,
Hmm.
even if I wasn't with him, they could confiscate our property or
Right.
my property, my car or whatever. And that is just so unfair because they assume that you know about it if it's your boyfriend or your husband.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also how a lot of women wind up in jail. It is not that they are committing the crime, but they have boyfriends who are active drug sellers or whatever, and they're near the boyfriend when the boyfriend gets arrested, and the girlfriend also gets arrested and winds up going to jail also. And that's like how the majority of women wind up in prison now.
I'm not through the whole second chapter, admittedly, but what struck me from the first 10 pages was it seems that she's already starting off by saying what you don't know will hurt you. Because in the first few, she's saying, this person didn't know, the young man riding in the back of the bus, that he could have told the officer no, you cannot search in my bag, or, didn't have to continue the conversation. And it's true. That's a problem in our neighborhoods. It's not a new issue. And like, how do you get that information out to the general public and to young people to handle it properly, not to be disrespectful with it, but to exercise your right respectfully as a citizen, a free citizen. And my sister laughed, but my Uncle Charlie, God bless him, he gave me a small, tiny book of the Constitution so that I would know my rights. And look, I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh my God, look, Uncle Charlie gave me this book so that I would know what my rights are. And if the young man had known his rights, he wouldn't have, wound up in that trouble. He happened to be carrying a brick of cocaine, but he had every right to tell the officer, because there was no reason to suspect him. There was no suspicious activity. They was just doing clean sweeps on the buses coming through.
Right.
And he had the right to tell the officer, no, you may not search my bag. He doesn't have to be nasty, but he could have still said it. How many of us don't know that? I know I see an officer and right away I'm like, yes, how may I help?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I got so far going in.
But that's it. A lot of people still know it, but in the heat of the moment, when the police roll up on you, because of the intimidation factor, even if you know it, you're going to like, just get me out of this situation. Yeah, sure. Do whatever you want. Just get me out of this situation. So it's twofold. It's knowing it and then being comfortable in that knowledge. And I think that there's going to be a long stretch between the knowledge and the comfort zone.
Yeah.
And the third part of that is that they actually can take you to jail then on probable cause. Right.
Which is what they speak about a lot. Michelle Alexander speaks about a lot in this chapter, how broad probable cause is, or how broad the latitude is for police officers to stop you and engage you. And it's almost literally anything. If you're driving too slow, if you're driving too fast, if your car is too nice, if it's not nice enough. If there's one person in the car, if there's 4 people in the car, she just basically said that the police can stop you for anything. Like, it is almost impossible for you to walk through life without committing some kind of infraction that the police can then, on the pretext that they've seen a crime, and then the next thing you know, they're searching the back of your car, which just seems on its face would be thrown out once it got into court. But now the court system is also backing this behavior up. So unless you have a serious lawyer, which probably 90% of the people don't have, they wind up just in the system.
Yeah, I'd like to add that was what struck me the most, Ron, is that the disintegration of the Fourth Amendment by the Supreme Court, that struck me throughout this entire chapter, that how all our protections have been ruled to be undermined by the overarching rights of the police. And like, it seems like they're, even if we exercise our right not to be searched, that they still have a right then to arrest us, and they will, and it'll be upheld by the court. And this has been going on for decades. That's what struck me the most of this chapter, was the Supreme Court's complicitness with the 2-tiered system of justice of rich versus poor, and how mostly poverty is an indictment, and that was that was one of the major compelling pieces for me.
Yeah, and it almost seems like these police departments depend on that. They depend on poor people not knowing their rights, getting caught up in the system. Just kind of like follow up on that Fourth Amendment issue. Again, I'm just so struck by the financial incentives to completely disregard our rights. you know, as individual citizens. Like, even when there were some judges who felt that like a case was kind of shaky or, you know, didn't have the weight that it should have to enter court, few of the judges, and I'm listening to the audio book just for openness, but few of the judges ever take any action on behalf of the defendant. Everything is done for the police department unless you have a lawyer, unless you can pay, you know, to have a lawyer um, come in and defend you. And then, you know, cases are summarily dismissed because that lawyer knows the law and is, you know, so they're not, those kinds of defendants aren't spending any time in jail.
Right. Yeah.
And that's elaborated on as far as the effectiveness or really ineffectiveness of public defenders. It goes on in the chapter to talk about how most public defenders are overworked with caseloads. They have at least 100 clients, if not more. They're not paid as well as other attorneys. So as a result, they all are not able to sufficiently support their clients. So they talk with them for what they said. Some examples was 10 minutes that he was able to conference with his client who is being accused of murder or whatever it is. That, and it's not a sufficient representation in any way. And even just the general stereotype about public defenders is them being hapless. Even the ones that are trying to do the job are just, they're ineffectual, either they don't care. I mean, that kind of stereotype is throughout media as well.
Which she comments on, like, our popular perception is really framed by Law and Order and these other TV shows where we think there's like a clear process. And I think she gave a stat like 80% of all arrests plead out, like they don't even go to trial, which, you know, which bites. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's one of the, I think one of the passages that sort of touched my attention, because you'd find that most of these drug cases are resolved via plea bargains. And almost all of them don't go to trial, of which it's an issue where most of, maybe some of them are innocent, but they are pressured to sort of plead guilty because of how they've seen how prisons have sort of affected communities, of which many people sort of feel intimidated by the criminal justice system, that they sort of accept whatever unjust system treatment or rather they may receive. I once watched one movie, but I'm not sure about the name of which. It's young boys where they were forced to sort of agree to something they've committed because they'll be given lies that if you agree to this, you'd get minimum sentence or you just go home, things like that. So and this also relates to people that are sort of are charged with these cases, and children are involved in this process, of which they are charged without even receiving a lawyer so that they can defend them and all of that, of which it also states that 90% of children are sort of charged without a lawyer, and they agree to this justice because of how they fear police officers, things like that. So it's a matter of confusion and fear in how the justice system tends to sort of play out, whether people are innocent or not. That's one of the passages that sort of caught my attention.
Yeah, I was working in the Supreme Court building before lockdown, and on a regular basis, I would see them bringing in young Black men, let's say between 13 and 16, usually young men who hadn't even developed yet physically. And they would be coming in chains, and it reminded me of slavery. But they would be coming in the chains in the evening, you know, in between hours, weird moments. And they had, you could see they had nothing, you know, they had no backup. And I saw that on a regular in the court system. And I myself have been in situations with the police, and they can be really, really intimidating. And, you know, I don't bow down easy, but you have to be wise as all get out.
And you have to, it takes a level of courage to talk back to somebody with a gun. You know, even if they are part of the legal, you know, law enforcement, and you would believe that law enforcement, you know, it are your friend or is your friend. You know, even if you know your rights, if 3 or 4 cops roll up on you, you know, it can be intimidating.
Yeah, I think we can't overstate the intimidation factor. And I mean, it could be a cop talking to you through a microphone, which was the situation I was in, a guy yelling at me and my friend. And between the two of us, we figured out some stuff we could do. But I think intimidation is 99% of it. And I have acted as a street witness when people are being arrested. I will stand there and let the cops know I'm watching them. And I let the people know that I'm watching them. Doesn't always make a difference, but I just let them know I'm watching. Um, and you know, sometimes the folks get out, and then I walk them down the street and yell at them for doing stupid stuff. You know, our youth they are youth, and they think they can walk by the police and just walk by, and they can't. Most times.
That's what they also mention in this chapter is stop and frisk. You know, and that's how so many young people got swept up into the system. And even then they mention like how arbitrary the reason can be behind a police officer, you know, just stopping you, checking your pockets, and, you know, possibly entering you into the system.
Yeah, I walked behind 10 youth one day. I saw the police. I said, okay, this is going to be a mess. And I said, they could go east. They don't have to go directly in their direction. They walk directly in their direction, and all 10 get stopped. And I said, okay, I'm going to watch this. And they were well-mannered, well-spoken. They did what they needed to get out. They got out. When we got out the park, they weren't my kids, but I yelled at them for not exercising some type of wisdom. I said, can't you see that net in front of you?
When it
Why
becomes,
are you walking into it? You know?
I think the danger too becomes when like you were saying, they're not developed yet, and it's not just physically developed, they're definitely not cognitively developed. And so for them, obviously, even if they're respectful, that's a great thing, because that can save their life. Like it's I think a lot of a lot of our Caucasian cohorts forget that it's a matter of life and death for a lot of our boys. You know, it's not just, oh, they're violating my rights. Sometimes you have to eat that so that you can walk away and fight it later. Fight it in the safety of your home, go home, tell your parents, go home, tell somebody, and then fight it in the back end, which unfortunately sometimes makes it a reactionary system. Well, not sometimes, it is a reactionary system. But if it's going to save a life, it's almost like they can't even exercise rights anymore, because then it gets all twisted up by the police, and we're burying another Black man or boy.
This kind of reminds me of the Central Park 5 and the hours that these boys, you know, had, the intimidation that the cops put them through. And then they ended up having videotape, you know, confessions to the detective. But this all, like you guys were saying, all of it had to do with the intimidation. the poor knowledge that these boys had. They were very confused, these hours upon hours of them having to be questioned without their parents, and just the fear that the cops can instill in you can make you say something, or I believe someone said twist their words and make them feel and say something inappropriate without effective counsel. And then you're just charged for something you didn't even do. I mean, these kids were fearful, but again, these boys are around, 14, 16, that age range that, I mean, you think you know everything, but then you don't know anything at all.
Right.
And the truth of the matter is, like, whatever it is we're doing right now at this moment, it could possibly be illegal, period. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of the laws that we break, we don't even know that we're breaking laws, so that the whole idea of like thinking, oh, okay, well, if you just do the right thing, you'll be fine. I mean, remember the little tags on your mattresses that if you ripped off, you could be fined X, and of course, it's not us per se, it was the manufacturers or the people who are selling the mattresses. But I was saying all that to say, so even the kids, who were walking in front, and, for the lady who was discussing, had those kids made a left, do you really think that those police would not have gathered them, regardless of whether they walked straight to the left or to the right?
I don't know, but I think they could have made a wiser choice. I don't
walk
know.
and go mind their business, like,
to look, scan the situation, and don't enter. That's survival skill. They didn't have it, because I saw it, but they did not have it. They had not been taught it, obviously.
But hold on, Jacqueline.
Yeah.
The idea that we are at a point where we still have to talk about a survival skill in dealing with police is abominable. It's atrocious that we still think that we have to train our children to survive from the police. And
yes,
what this book has brought to the fore, it's not just the police. The police have been given absolute leeway from the highest court in the land to infringe on all our rights. Each and every one of us is. We live in a fascist state, and the Supreme Court has in every way stated that we have a double system. They know it. They've been saying it for decades, if not centuries. And it's clear in their writings that we live in this two-tiered system. And yet, they will still defend police action no matter what. And this is what the most frightening thing of this chapter was for me.
Yeah. And I think
it's our inheritance from coming out of slavery.
Exactly. Right. And people are afraid to speak up, even if they're in the right, they're afraid to speak up.
Yeah. I was going to say that intimidation starts at a very young age. I mean, I was a teacher in the public schools for 28 years. And luckily I was always in alternative schools. So our students didn't have to go through metal detectors, but I have done like after school work in other bigger schools where kids have to go through these metal detectors, and that is such a dehumanizing thing. It's like you're suspect at 13, 14, 15, having every single morning have to go through these metal detectors, taking off your belt. I mean, it's just that, and with the increase of actual arrests happening in the schools for things that in a suburban area would be, treated as youthful fights or whatever. But kids are being arrested and then they're entered into this system. So I think it's a lot it's so important for those of us who work with young people, teachers, to teach about how to safely engage in these situations when you get stopped by police. And, sometimes that will help you, but sometimes it won't matter. So much in this chapter really struck me, just like the money situation that Ron was talking about. And I mean, I've been aware and reading a lot about how militarized the police have become. And so she really kind of dates it to that hyper militarization of our police forces is part of this label of war on drugs. But now how that militarization has impacted our society and our so-called democratic rights in other ways that reach beyond like young, even just young Black men being stopped by the police, but the kind of brutal militarized reaction to the protests that have been happening over the last few months. So that was really something. And that ties into the money that how these local police forces are getting money to buy. They're encouraged to buy the leftover military gear from the Pentagon, and they're getting grants to use this kind of stuff. So that money in so many ways, infects this. But there was a lot in this chapter that's very, very important.
And also, Alexandra sort of points out at the beginning of the chapter that we sort of are told about how police are supposed to protect the community and things like that. We were supposed to think that all they do is to protect the public, but the manner in which they are funded, the manner in which they are trained, the manner in which they are militarized, it sort of changes that whole thing from reality, because instead of protecting the public, they're actually bringing violence to the public due to the manner in which they sort of conduct this war against drugs. Because you find that in most situations, when they're searching for these houses for drugs, they sort of do that in a most aggressive manner, in a most violent manner, things like that. And also, but it's sort of violent, traumatic also to children as well, and other vulnerable people around. So that's also part of the problem, is how the police have sort of structured how the funding tends to be structured, because it's also part of these incentives that have been made that if they continue to fight this war against drugs, they'll be able to get more funding, things like that, and they get to have the assets of the people sort of. Even these people are not yet sort of convicted, but they are suspected of drugs and things like that. They get to sort of seize those assets and things like that. So it's also part of that, the manner in which the police are funded. I think that's one of the significant contributing factors in how the police tend to sort of look at this particular matter.
Yeah,
And just to add into
I
that,
just wanted
sorry.
to pull up this document, this little book that was circulated in the 1985 that people would give out to people of Black people of all it. Yeah. And I think I'm only showing this to suggest that I feel like we are kept in the dark a great deal. So I'm very happy to be reading this book. I think the George Floyd protests reveal just how much money is actually sitting in police departments, and I learned that New York City has $6 billion. Yeah. That's a crazy amount of money that could come back to the communities or departments, I'm gonna shut my mouth. That's it.
No, you're right. And to build affordable housing, to solve the homelessness problem. How many of the foster care kids, when they age out, they have nowhere to go? That's the worst. They go through this whole system. They go through jump all these hurdles that are put before them so that they can have some kind of hope for tomorrow, and they have nowhere to live, no one to stay with. There should be some kind of housing for them until they're at least 25, to be able to, whatever they work, pay the rent there, and maybe they, in order to fund the place, part-time. There's this attorney I know that in her Brooklyn neighborhood, they have a co-op there, and all the residents of that of that neighborhood work shifts, so that they don't, have to pay people outside of it, and they can keep the prices affordable for everybody who's a member of the supermarket club. Things like that, for housing for the young people. You think they wouldn't be more than happy? Not only that, to work and to keep a community for themselves, and not only them, but people who are in the homeless system right now. You think they wouldn't be happy to do that? Have some sense of self? Instead, they could take all that money that you talk about that's sitting there and do exactly that. Something really useful right now to solve a problem right now. And why do they have an issue about defunding them if they already have money there? Then fine. Take if you do get defunded and you got money sitting there that you already dipping into without nobody knowing, then it's a wash. Nobody's taking anything from you, but the community needs the help. People need to be able to have some kind of sense of pride, because this system is set up to where it's like they were saying, who's not going to get stopped by some kind of minor traffic infraction? Sometimes you might do something. They said you may have. They might judge that you didn't say 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi at the stop sign, and say you rolled through the stop sign, or you rolled through it, or you didn't, stop before you made a turn. Whatever the case is, they're saying we're the ones likely to be stopped. Or like you said, the driver don't match the caliber of the vehicle, so I'm gonna stop them because it must be stolen. Things like that. We're the ones our kids are likely to be stopped, or people in our neighborhoods are likely to be stopped for those things. So, and then that's when that minor traffic infraction, or what they deem to be, turns into a felony arrest. That's what they,
Yeah. That's exactly what happened. No, go ahead.
Yeah, she's right. No, I'm sorry. I went off because it's upsetting. It really.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened to my friend and I. We just turned into an area. My friend had no idea that it wasn't a place that she could bring her car, and we got caught for like 2 hours and a half. We managed not to get arrested, but we got caught in
Two
place.
law-abiding, mature women. Okay, look what
I'm like. I'm not public enemy number one. Come on, find somebody else. But I'm thinking about activists and opportunities for activists. I'm going to go back and say, something like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that came out during the Civil Rights Movement. Whenever they were going through a town to do a march, they did voter registration, they did legal workshops. They did like 4 or 5 things that will increase the community's awareness. It's not enough to march. The march has to be multi-purpose, so that by the time you walk through, you've enriched that community. The problems is the marches are not happening in our communities. They're happening in these odd places, outside a court, outside, but they still are spaces that can be used to educate. I can't go to these things, but I think they're missed opportunities.
I wanted to say, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Liliana.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to go back into the approach of how a lot of like the law enforcement approach and handling, most of the cases and violent cases, which, most of them pertains to domestic violence, things in regarding with neighbor disputes, and other related with homelessness. And, most of the approach that a lot of the law enforcement is like the militarized. They go in, already putting a hand in their guns, like the community is the enemy. And I think that kind of militarized training it just doesn't work, and it just divides the community. And, I think that there should be different kind of like implicit bias trainings, and also different kind of responders that respond to mental health and domestic violence. A lot of these officers, they don't know how to even de-escalate a lot of these situations. And a lot of these situations don't, you know, when they already respond, the damage already has been done. So, you know, using guns and to, you know, solve or respond to any of these, you know, calls, it's not working at the moment. And, you know, I think that there should be looking at how we can have, you know, individuals who are equipped to respond to mental health issues. If, you know, somebody calls 911 and knowing how to identify, okay, this is related with mental health, this is related with, you know, de-escalating a neighbor dispute, like sending people that can respond effectively to those kind of problems or issues. Because obviously an officer arriving at a scene with, you know, putting their hands on the gun, or, you know, somebody's not responding, shooting or tasing, like it's just not working. And that just divides the community. And,
but they do,
you know, the
have
police should
different
be hands in
units,
hands
like
with the
that
public. And
people just don't follow instructions. They have the units, but these policemen get all gung-ho and say, I'm going to make an arrest anyway. But they have special units for that.
But I think what Liliana's saying is that they have to, like she was saying, our community. You can't hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You know, like she was saying, that, you know, the communities are the enemy. It's our communities that are the enemies. That's the thing, because they're not the enemies when you go into affluent zip codes, and when you go into, and the training is different. It's almost as if they're trained to deal with us differently. They're trained to deal with our communities differently. And I think that, you know, kind of piggybacking on what Jacqueline was saying as far as organizing and educating, and I think that's a big part of it, because it's like we don't have the resources. So our children are already at, you know, in an affluent neighborhood, they have civics classes, they have government classes, they have structural hierarchical classes on how, you know, the government works, and constitutional classes and things like that, that our schools just don't have. So our children are already starting at a disadvantage. And so when you don't know your rights, it's difficult to exercise what you don't know. And so the education, the educating part is, you know, critical, but then it's like who, when, where, and how. Because if you're already dealing with a lack of resources, where do you get it from? You know, and the resources are there, but they're not for us. That's the thing.
The police and some of the agencies, it pointed out in the book, are trained, and they're trained. The DEA and some of the other agencies are actually trained, and I mean trained, how to deal with people of different persuasions, you know, and there's actually it might be now, but Black DEA agent, Black and brown DEA agents had brought up a suit against the government saying that it was discriminatory, and that's been recent. And I think that's probably because there are more Black and brown agents now.
Well, you know, I heard that in the police academy, they would, when they're training them to shoot, that they would be Black, you know, images of Black people. So, you know, it goes so deep, you know, and the police, well, I think that the police union, you know, is, I mean, it's terrible, because it just defends any kind of thing that the police does. And the police don't live in our neighborhoods. They live outside. They come with these racist opinions about our Black and brown people, so that we are all criminals, and we all deserve to be, you know, put up against the wall, or put in jail, or shot. And I'm not saying all of them do, but many of them do, you know, have this racist attitude. They don't know what our community is, and they don't want to know, and they consider our communities as, you know, nothing, you know. And in terms of I think we have to, in our communities, we can't rely on the schools or anything else. But I think, you know, even if they're like small groups of people, like small groups of young people that are led by maybe a knowledgeable older person or even a young person, to talk about these things so that our kids can, you know, be more protected, you know, in the communities, and when they see the police. You know, that black book, every kid should read that. You know, every parent should read that, you know. So that's it.
I think we keep going back to the idea of the education, but I think people are overestimating the, I don't know, political education can only get you so far. We keep going back to this, oh, if people only knew, if they only knew, if they only knew. Plenty of people do know their rights, and they still get them stomped on. They're still arrested. They're still killed. People who are compliant with their hands up, saying, my hands are up, still get shot. Black people, typically. Brown people, obviously. So we keep going back to this. And even the idea of officers reflecting the communities they're patrolling. I mean, we went down this road after Ferguson. Yes, Darren Wilson or Darrell Wilson, whatever his name is, who killed Mike Brown, white cop. Ferguson had a huge problem with this. Obama addressed it with implicit bias trainings and all these other things, restructure the department. But those are not real solutions. And we're back at square one. If anything, this past spring has showed us is that is not sufficient. The police are inherently violent. They're encouraged to be violent, whether it's a black cop or white cop. That is the function of the police. And they're all complicit at every level. So same thing with even having someone higher up, Kamala Harris, if we want to go down that road. This chapter talks about prosecutors and how they're really more powerful even than the cops and the judges. Kamala Harris prosecuted plenty of black and brown people, black and brown mothers for being truant, drug offenses, and all sorts of other things. So that's not really, I mean, we need to kind of move away from that narrative that's really how we arrive at this, is if we have people that reflect the community.
Kamala Harris's big thing was the truancy issue, where she was putting parents in jail or fining them if their children were truant. So that's kind of her claim to fame, of putting parents in prison for their kids' truancy, as opposed to addressing the truancy directly.
Wait, Greg, I actually think she's trying to deny it now. She's trying to back away from it just because she's gotten so much flack about it. So I'm trying to give this woman the benefit of the doubt, you know, like what Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. So hopefully this sister has changed her attitude. But I'm glad, Greg, that you brought up prosecutors and government, because when I read the part about Obama actually helping to fund this system even further, I was just so heartbroken. Like, I think I had heard or read that before, but now rereading it again, I was like, come on, man. I mean, it says he donated an extra $2 billion to the program, and Obama knows the deal. Like, he knows what's up. So I don't know if he's trying to capitulate to a certain voting bloc, or if he honestly is like Kamala, but is he like Kamala and think, oh, well, these people need to be locked up. Maybe that's his mindset, you know? But it's just like, you know, when I was reading that, I'm like, could Obama have literally struck down these laws? Like, I'm not sure what his power is, but is there some level when he was in office where he could have struck down some of these laws that were in place and maybe redirected some of the money towards education and other helpful programs?
Well, what he was saying was that he was against innocent families, like the mothers, the working mothers who just happened to come here illegally, or for nonviolent offenses, that they would be being treated like they were felons or murderers. That's what he was against. I don't think he was against any prison system per se.
Obama?
And like the way they're trying to, he was. That's what his thing was about prison reform. It wasn't about so much as decriminalizing things so that you can make money off of them. He was just saying these are nonviolent things that are stopping people from living, or you sending people to jail because they was just trying to come here for a better life. He didn't want those people to be treated like you would somebody like, say, you know, Charles Manson, who murdered people, or, you know what I'm saying? And that's how they were being treated, and it's wrong. He said you were putting these people through a violent prison system, or, you know, that these people have no idea how violent the capitalism is, and they come here and they get disillusioned, or they get caught up in these webs because they have no idea, you know, of what they're getting themselves into. I was shocked, as you are, though, to see it that way, but then I thought about what it was that he was concentrating on. And it was just that. It was just those small segments. It wasn't the huge, you know, overall. It was just a few segments of that population that he felt were wrongly or over punished, for God's sake.
Nah,
you know?
nah. Obama's got some splaining to do. $2 billion. He does. Like he's perpetuating the system.
That's why I think this book is so
I agree with you.
powerful. No, that's why I think this book is powerful, and it's good to read the details, because really what Alexander's pointing to is the systemic nature of the way the police behave. And so if we just ask for like diversity training, or, you know, go along with this idea of, oh, it's a few bad apples that we need to change, or we need more Black cops, or we need more women cops, that it doesn't change the basic nature of what policing is about in our racial capitalist society. As some people said last week, going back to linking it to slave patrols. So I think that's what's really good about this book, is pointing out the systemic nature. I put a couple things in the chat that I thought were good, because last week some people were saying, like, what can we do? And this is like, it's sort of like, this is a done deal that they're always going to be abusing people. But over the weekend, I attended this webinar by the Rising Majority, which comes out of the Movement for Black Lives. Yeah, and it was really, it was really good. And what I like about the Rising Majority is that when you hear all these different racial justice and economic justice groups kind of coming under this umbrella, and then could hear what people are doing on the ground, like all over the country, it's pretty heartening, you know. So I just, and then there are a couple things here in New York City, the Communities United for Police Reform, and then this Breathe Act that they were talking about. So it's like, I think these things are ways that address the core of the problem and reaching to the systemic nature, and not just asking for some like superficial changes in how the police treat us.
Right.
That's my sharing. My offering.
Yeah, that was an excellent workshop, and I was so proud of those young people, you know, for speaking out and organizing, and not just talking about the problem, but also, you know, some of the ways that we can deal with the problems, you know.
Right, absolutely.
They were really good.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, Pamela, I saw one young woman who had the same name as you. Is she related to you?
Oh, she's my niece.
Oh, okay.
Asha Ransby Sporn, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, her
okay.
mom is my sister-in-law too, so
Okay.
I got two links.
Okay.
Yeah. Super proud.
Good.
Well, what about the way they're saying, like, how they want to like digitize sentencing or things like that? And so instead of you being like in a physical jail, so you'll just have this bracelet on, you'll be under house arrest instead. And then they'll be building walls. And then like, we'll have this, I said, the movie, they made a movie about it, District 9. Remember the movie District 9? I mean, this, and there's another movie called The White Man's Burden, which was made in like the 90s. I went crazy. I finally found the movie, but it's the same thing. You know, they're going to try to make it so that it's not so bad. So then they try to normalize it. But what people aren't realizing is that they're just trying to keep you down here so that you can never rise higher. You will never be able to make a difference. You're always going to be in a sort of a prison because of that. We will be able to move up anywhere because they're going to say, well, but you know, you have to be above reproach. Or you know, you can't decriminalize everything, because then you won't have any kind of, you know, civil society. You know, we need law and order, right? You can't decriminalize everything, which is right now the solution to some things, to kind of allow people to move forward from small faux pas from their youth, you know? I mean, it just seems like they just determined somehow, some way, and we have to be vigilant. We have to be paying attention and kind of, you know, just cut them off at the path.
Well, in terms of decriminalizing, I mean, a lot of what Alexander focuses on is related to drugs. And I find that it's kind of the failing of the book, even though it is her focus. It's just, she really harps on, especially in this chapter, the idea of like, oh, these are people who are low-level drug offenders. They're not even drug kingpins who are getting kind of swept up in this. And really it requires kind of viewing things through a different lens and not disposing of someone just because they might have a violent offense on their record and saying, oh, well, this low-level drug offender doesn't deserve incarceration, but maybe this violent person does. And that's kind of where we get at this sort of impasse, this fork in the road between people who are looking to maybe just reform the system and those who want to abolish it, between, oh, who's deserving of leniency and who is deserving of, you know, the bludgeon. So
and then you go right back to where we at, because it's going to be the haves and the have-nots. I'm sorry. It just, that's just.
The way I took it was, it's a societal problem, okay? Yes, she talks about it, but for me, the analogy is the money that we're spending on some of these programs and some of the things that are happening need to be reevaluated, and the money needs to go where it's most can be best used, as in public housing, as in health. The Public Health Association has what's called the social determinants of health, which, if you look at it, is totally global. So everything comes back to our society and how we live and how we eat. And the money was taken away from that for the war on drugs. And it just kind of rolled and snowballed from that. And I can see, I mean, I can kind of make that connection and understand where, you know, where she's coming from with the analogy she's using.
I think we have to think about, like, why do people commit crime? Like, I think the focus on policing is not what we should be focusing on. It is why, so for example, why do people rob, right? What is lacking in their lives that make people go out and rob someone or rob a house or whatever the case may be? Like, the majority of the so-called crimes that we're talking about stem from social problems, right? Social problems, social inequities, economic inequities that we can be solving for within our communities, right? And I feel that is where we get trapped all the time. We just say, instead of dealing with the social problems, we're just gonna police and incarcerate. No, actually work to create the resources, shore up the community with resources, so there isn't a need to have an carceral system, to have a carceral system in the first place. I think that's where we get trapped all the time. And it's also about who defines what is crime, right? I think I was reading something where there were 5 federal crimes on the books prior to the 1970s. And then all of a sudden we have like 3,000 different crimes that someone can, you know, possibly commit. Like, who is deciding all of that? Yeah. What is being defined as a crime? Why do people commit crime? We need to get out of this trap of incarceration and, you know, putting our people in positions to be incarcerated, right? I think there's a lot of work that is being done around abolition, for example, where it's not just about abolishing prisons and abolishing policing, but it's also ensuring that that we have alternatives in our communities, right? We have a system to hold people accountable, right? We have food in our communities. We have an opportunity to ensure that the things that motivate the crime, the quote unquote crime, the things that whatever that motivation is, that it's gone, right? So I think that's where the focus needs to be, especially when thinking about, you know, the ways that we can, the path forward, right? Like, how do we resolve this very huge issue?
There
And
was
also,
actually,
oh,
oh, I'm
sorry, go ahead.
sorry. No, I'll
Go
just
ahead.
really quick. There is a really good article on abolition in last month's Vanity Fair. It was like their Black issue, and all the articles dealt with, you know, Black America. And there were 2 articles on police unions and then one on abolitions, if anybody wants to get more information. And getting the abolition include all the money that could be used for beneficial programs, a lot of which were named in this chat, and how that would go to your point of reducing people from committing petty crimes to go into the prison system already. It doesn't have a solution for innocent people going to prison, but at least to prevent low-level people from entering into the system.
And also, it's important to distinguish, because you're asking, well, what defines a crime? Distinguishing between crime and harm, because a crime could be committed and it doesn't mean that someone is actually being harmed. And that's really the crux of this whole thing. Because in this chapter, we had examples, I don't have them in front of me, but I remember a couple of them, of these mandatory minimums. Men who went away for a very long time for, was it stealing children videotapes? It was their 3rd strike, so they get however many years. The most famous example, everyone must know this one, of the man who stole the hedge clippers. It was his 3rd offense, so he got X number of years, right? These are crimes that did not actually harm anyone, so why are they being punished for them? So it requires us to reimagine, well, what really is harm? Who are the people affected? And even if there are people harmed by the offender, what alternatives could there be to hold them accountable, as opposed to just simply tossing them into prison?
Exactly.
But these are actions that we can take. There is actually a system in place to increase the prison population because it's a for-profit business. And so there are not solutions that want to be taken on a higher level because this is a business. So you have those forces that we're working against, and then you have the forces of the people trying to help the community and to prevent people from going away forever for toy videos and things like that. So it's just, we just need to figure out a really good system, a way to navigate it without supporting the prison system. Because if it's bad for business, it's bad for business, and ultimately it will go out of business.
We also need to look at the importance of mental health and mental health treatment and its relationship to imprisonment, and how many people, one, try to sort of self-medicate using drugs and wind up in the system, not because they wanted to sell drugs, not because they wanted to be part of a bigger sort of drug culture, but they're dealing with mental health issues that sort of led them down a certain path. And if early on we decide that we are going to treat mental health equal to all other health issues, it feels like almost by default there would be a certain part of that population that would never turn to drugs, would never turn to either, you know, cocaine or opioids or something harder than that.
You know, I want to agree with everybody, but I don't know if it's as simple as that, because this whole country, white, black, brown, yellow, whatever color, are using drugs. But we're the ones who are in the jails, you know, really, you know, and, you know, so I think all of this has a racial basis. It's oppression, and why people commit crimes, you know, and why some people are punished and other people are not punished, why people are put in jail for 99 years and the other one gets a smack on the hand. I mean, a lot of that has to do, I think the whole thing has to do with racial caste, you know, really. I mean, it goes, like we were talking before, it goes back to the enslavement times, you know, and it just is a different kind of way to oppress people, to keep people in their place, to destroy communities. You know, and I think we should work on different issues, but I think we should. I think it's being naive to think that it's not because of the racism in this country.
Great. But you know, I also think that what's driving police departments, kind of going back to how I started it, is this financial incentive to lock people up. That police departments, no matter what city you go to, they are the highest paid individuals, usually of city workers. And everyone else's salary is based on how much the police officers in your city make. And I think if we take this financial, two things. One, I think we really, on a national level, need to commit to paying teachers equal to what we pay police officers. I think you would see a different type of police officer and also a different type of teacher if we did that, but also taking out their ability to keep all of this money. You know, if mental health is an issue, then all the money they see should go into mental health. If education is an issue, then all the money that police department sees should be put into education and not into their coffers, which is really, you know, how they sort of support themselves.
Yes, and they said that police overtime is their largest expense. They say that you can recognize what's happening depending on the arrest times. Some lawyer or something was looking at the arrest logs and the time and saw that right around, you know, time to get off work is when all of a sudden these arrests would just come out of nowhere. There's a specific time because there's some special lingo they call it where, I'm about to get this overtime. And so a lot of that, what do you call it? When they're talking about taking the money away, that was limiting their overtime because that's their largest thing. But can you imagine, you know, like just depending on what's going on right now, if you get pulled over and you decide to get snarky or something, it's 5 o'clock, you're going home, he's getting ready to go home, and he decides, I need some extra money.
And if it's a Friday, you'll spend the whole weekend in jail. I mean, if you challenge that police officer, you know.
Yep, that's right.
But then who are they picking up? They're not picking up the guy in Bronxville.
That's what I was just getting ready to say. It wouldn't be such
right here in the Bronx.
It wouldn't be such a big deal if it was done equally. Like, you know, put that many police or put that much effort in. I think it would be interesting study if it hasn't already been done to see the disproportion between precincts and overtime and the locality of those precincts. You know, and see, is it 46? Is it 52? Is it, you know, as opposed to like Bronxville or Upper West Side or, you know, the other affluent neighborhoods, Jamaica Estates, things like that. Do you see as much overtime over there?
Does anyone have the New York Times from today handy? If you do, look at the opinion section. And I'm trying to see, one of the things that I actually went to was to look at the bill that he signed in January, that's back to police. And it was actually a link from the opinion today. It was Leonhardt, David Leonhardt.
Yeah.
But it was from today, and I don't have today's, but it was from today. So, and I actually deleted it. But the one thing that's on there, there's a link on there to the bill that is that he signed. It is at Presidential Commission on Law Enforcement. It was from January. And if you go, I think it's justice.com. It's the United States Department of Justice, justice.com. And you can find that bill. And it talks about it. And he wants to ramp up and start his own militia, it looks like. So they put a hold on that, and like right after it was, but there was a write-up about it today in the Times Opinion.
The Times Opinion went hardcore on Trump on Sunday.
Sure
Usually,
did.
yeah, like usually they will endorse a candidate, you know, then just put like the Times endorses whatever.
Yeah, they went.
But on Sunday, it was like all this whole breakdown. I was like, I have never seen this before from the paper.
He's threatening democracy.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
that was they said, yeah.
For the first time ever, USA Today endorsed Joe Biden. They have never endorsed a president since they began publishing in 1982.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, it's presidential order number 13896. So if you get a chance, read it. I saved it in my Dropbox.
I'm sorry,
But you
Patricia. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
Oh, I was just asking, who'd you say endorsed?
No, this was an article that was in the Times Opinion. I don't get the whole paper. I just get the opinion.
Oh,
and
no,
this is Trump's. This is the bill that
it.
Trump actually signed into order that they called back. And I was just given the bill number.
I just posted a long link in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's to the actual document.
Yeah, that's what I have.
that shouldn't be surprising because Trump is always talking about law and order. Let's restore law and order. And I think that the book touches on that when law and order is code word for, you know, Black and brown people protesting and demanding equal rights. And because of this, it's disturbing the peace. It's called, they're troublemakers, rabble rousers. And so we need to return to law and order, keep them in their place, and then let's enjoy our lives the way that we can in our privileged state. So that's not surprising to me. I mean, I'll read about it, but I'm not surprised at all.
If you read it and look at what happened with the different protests over the summer, he would have really had a ball if he could have actually called out all of the guards and everything without being restrained.
Mm.
Yeah.
So we have 3 minutes left of discussion. I don't know if you guys can hear me. I'm sorry, I put it in the chat as well. I just want to do a time check.
Thank you. I just want to say that, that I appreciated the structure of this chapter, how she ended her sections with these hypothetical questions that appeal to everyone. And I'm sure all of us in this group here read them very clearly and understood them, but it was like a broader attempt on her part to speak to a much broader audience. You know, who wouldn't snitch in light of maybe getting some money and or less jail time, you know? And I thought that was brilliant on her part in the way she structured this chapter.
You always have to put yourself in the shoes of the person because you just never know what kind of backup they have, access to any sort of, not even legal representation, but maybe competent professional adults. You just never know what somebody has access to. So it's so sad and understandable. Like I think somebody mentioned when they see us, and I'm really glad that that movie came out, because I remember when it happened and I was little, and I didn't really follow it as a young person. I just was like, okay, the guys went to prison. But then as an older person, watching it back and watching how those kids were railroaded, and how even when their parents were brought into the precinct to try to provide some sort of guidance, the parents were incapable, of even processing what the right thing to do was. So it's just an impossible situation.
I was old enough to read the stories in the Newsday when it was happening, and I'm unable to sit through the reenactment. Still, I haven't been able to watch it because of two things. One, I've been working now with family court and knowing about the juvenile justice system, etc. And to see the atrocities that occurred. I watched the first part when I saw the DA just saying, I need to get this or whatever, and making people come up with these statements. At that point, I had to just stop. I couldn't, because I lived through it, and I'm like, I can't believe that's what happened.
And there's another documentary about a brother, I forget his name, but he ended up being in prison for 3 years for stealing a backpack. And like, he didn't steal the backpack. The guy just said, oh, was that black dude? And the dude was, I think,
Khalif Browder.
Khalif Browder. And Khalif Browder.
Yeah,
it was a 5-part documentary, and Khalif Browder sat in prison for 3 years because he couldn't afford the bail. Yeah, he was a child. And he couldn't afford the bail. And when he came out, he was so screwed up, he ended up committing suicide. So it's just, his rights were completely railroaded. It's horrible.
That's the young man that committed suicide, right? He wound up committing suicide. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
You have to figure there's so many other, sorry, Stephanie, there's so many other untold stories out there.
Right. And I just want to name that, when we have these discussions and we talk about this and we're theorizing and we're coming up with, ideations and, thinking very theoretically, I just want to name that when we have these discussions, specifically when we're talking about the prison industrial complex and all its tentacles and how it infiltrates the levels of families, life, access, all the things, and understanding that folks on this meeting are affected by this in this moment. Like, never assume that anybody in this meeting has nothing to do with the prison industrial complex or has never been impacted by the prison industrial complex. It's important for us to name that. And when we're sharing comments, when we're talking about this, to understand that. And when you say like, oh, the community needs to do blah, 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 this is the community. You know what I mean? We are talking amongst community members and we are holding each other accountable. Just as many comments of ideas of we should do this or we should do that, then this is the accountability in the room. How many of us, after we turn off our laptops or whatever, take the time to continue to be critically accountable to ourselves, and how all of us in some way, shape, or form, access to our privileges, are complicit in any of these systems in which we're talking about. It's a very much intersectional issue. We could talk about class, we could talk about race and gender and sexuality, which the book does not address. But it's important for us to note that nobody can really isolate themselves as to one particular identity. It's important to carry all of these identities centrally in these arguments that we're I guess sharing one another and ideating with one another. I just want to say that.